Hi, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. And if you're new, my name is Emma and this is my ASMR channel. I shall be reading a story from Christina's Kite and Other Stories. It is called Jiffy Gets Into Trouble. When little Sing Song came up into the lane throwing her new ball into the air, Jiffy hid behind a hedge in his garden and watched her. Sing Song was singing as usual as she threw her ball up and caught it. Up you go, ever so high. If I'm not careful, you'll touch the sky. This is the only story that I will be singing on as well. And at the last line, little Sing Song sent the ball up very high indeed. She hardly ever caught it when she threw it so high, and then it bounced, and she had to run after it, laughing. Down you go, you bounce away, you can't catch me, I hear you say. Jiffy watched for Sing Song to throw up her ball again. She was near his hedge. Suppose she missed it and it bounced into his garden. He could get it before she did and keep it. She wouldn't know. Up went the ball again, and Sing Song began her funny little song once more. Up you go, ever so high. If I'm not careful, you'll touch the sky. And at the last line, she sent the ball so high in the air that for one moment Jiffy thought it might touch the sky. But it didn't, of course. It began to fall, and to Jiffy's delight, it came over his garden. He reached out his hands and caught it. Sing Song didn't see him because he was behind the bush. She opened the gate and ran in. Mrs. Jiffy, she called. Can I come in and get my ball? Of course, called Jiffy's mother from the cottage. Come in, little Sing Song. But when Sing Song came in, she couldn't find the ball anywhere. That wasn't surprising because Jiffy had hidden it under the bush. He came out grinning. His mother saw him. Jiffy, you haven't got Sing Song's ball, have you? Because if you have, you must give it to her. Don't be naughty now. I haven't got it, said Jiffy, but still his mother wasn't certain. She knew Jiffy wasn't always truthful, and it made her sad. She looked at him sharply. Well, you look hard for it, she said, and I'll come and look too. Jiffy was alarmed. He didn't want his mother to come and look for the ball. She would be certain to find it under the bush, and she would guess that he had hidden it there. So he told a story. I know where it is, he said. I saw it fall. It fell onto our roof and rolled into the gutter that goes round it to catch the rain. Well, you go and borrow Mr. Tinky's big long stick, said his mother. You can easily reach the ball with that. Can you wait till he borrows the stick, Sing Song? No, I'm afraid I can't, said Sing Song. My mother is waiting for me to catch the bus with her. But perhaps Jiffy could leave the ball at our house if he gets it out of the gutter for me. Goodbye. She skipped off singing one of her little songs. My ball is lost, oh what a pity. It really was so very pretty. Funny little singing thing, said Mrs. Jiffy, smiling after Sing Song. Jiffy, what are you standing there like that for? Didn't you hear me to tell you to go and borrow Mr. Tinky's big stick? Now, Mr. Tinky lived a long way away, and Jiffy didn't want to go and borrow a stick to poke at a gutter for a ball that wasn't there. But he couldn't tell his mother that, so he pretended to go. He went out at the front gate and then crept in again at the back and sat in the shed reading. When he thought it was about time for him to say he was back from Mr. Tinky's, he put down his book and strolled into the house. Oh, there you are, said his mother. So where is Mr. Tinky's stick? Jiffy made up a story at once. He was clever at that. Oh, Ma, Mr. Tinky, sorry, but he had burglars last night, and he broke his stick chasing them away. Well, I never! Burglars! And how brave of old Mr. Tinky to chase them away, said his mother. Dear me! Well, Jiffy, you must go along to Mrs. Gobbo and ask her to lend you her stepladder. She's got a nice one. Mine's too small. Blow, said Jiffy to himself. He wanted to read his book. He didn't want to borrow a stepladder to find a ball that was still safely under the bush, so he did exactly the same thing again, walked out of the front gate and crept in again at the back. In 20 minutes' time, he came out of the shed. Ma, Mrs. Gobbo's sorry, but she says that poor Mr. Gobbo climbed up onto the step-ladder yesterday, and it broke, and he fell off and hurt his back. So she can't lend it to anyone until it's mended. Good gracious me, I do hope poor Mr. Gobbo isn't badly hurt, said Mrs. Jiffy in surprise. What a sad thing. Well, Jiffy, you must go to Mr. Tock now and ask him for that ladder of his. It's far too long, of course, but that won't matter. It will be rather heavy for you to carry, but you're a strong boy. Go along and get the ladder. Oh, this was too bad. First it's a stick, then it's a step-ladder, now it's a ladder, groaned Jiffy to himself. Why did I ever tell that story about Sing Song's ball being in the gutter? It's made me tell bigger and bigger stories all the morning. Well, I suppose I'd better pretend to get Mr. Tock's ladder, but I only hope this is the last thing Ma wants me to fetch. He went out of the front gate and crept in at the back for the third time. He took up his book again. He was quite lost in it and read for a long time. Then he heard his mother calling, Jiffy! Jiffy! Aren't you back from Mr. Tock's yet? Where's the ladder? Jiffy ran out of the shed in a hurry, trying to think of something to tell his mother. Oh, Ma, yes, here I am. But I couldn't borrow his ladder. He's painting his house and he's using it. Painting his house? Why, he only painted it last week from top to bottom, said Mrs. Jiffy, amazed. Why in the world is he doing it again? Oh, well, said Jiffy, thinking hard. Somebody horrid came by his house in the night, splashed red and blue paint all over it. It's such a sight that Mr. Tock is going to paint it all again. Poor Mr. Tock, said his mother. Well, the things that do happen. I would send you for Dame Goose's ladder, Jiffy, if only it wasn't dinner time. I do wish we could get Sing Song's ball for her somehow. Jiffy was beginning to get very tired of Sing Song's ball. It was still under the bush. He hoped his mother would forget all about it that afternoon because she was going to a party. Then he could play with the ball and see how high he could throw it and how well it bounced. It certainly was the finest ball he had ever seen. Mrs. Jiffy did seem to forget about the ball after dinner. She went to get herself ready for the party. Jiffy wasn't going. He was to stay and look after the house and feed the hens and ducks. Off went Mrs. Jiffy at 3 o'clock, looking very nice in her new hat. She walked down the lane and very soon met Mr. Tinky. Jiffy had said that the old man had broken his stick chasing burglars away, but here he was with his stick tapping along as usual. I suppose he's got it mended already, said Mrs. Jiffy to herself. Good afternoon, Mr. Tinky. I'm so sorry you had burglars last night. I hope they didn't take anything. Burglars? What burglars? Said old Mr. Tinky, thinking he couldn't have heard properly. I didn't know I had burglars. Nobody told me. But Mr. Tinky, you chased them. You were very brave, said Mrs. Jiffy. You broke your stick on them. I didn't, said Mr. Tinky. Here's my stick and it's not broken. Is it? Who told you all this nonsense? Mrs. Jiffy didn't answer. How very extraordinary. Jiffy had certainly told her about the burglars. She was thinking hard about it when she arrived at Mrs. Doddle's, where the party was being held, and going in at the gate, whom did she see but Mr. and Mrs. Gobbo? She stared at Mr. Gobbo. Well. Jiffy had told her that the poor old fellow had fallen off the step-ladder and hurt his back. She was glad it was better so soon. Well, Mr. Gobbo, how's your poor back? She said kindly. Mr. Gobbo stared in surprise. It's all right. Nothing wrong with it as far as I know, he said. But you fell off the step-ladder when it broke, said Mrs. Jiffy. What step-ladder? Ours isn't broken, said Mrs. Gobbo. Someone's been telling you a tale, Mrs. Jiffy. Mr. Gobbo is as right as rain, and so is our step-ladder. Mrs. Jiffy began to feel cross. Jiffy had certainly told her all about Mr. Gobbo. How could he have known about it if Mrs. Gobbo hadn't told him? It was very strange, and then she saw Mr. Tock, who was also a guest at the party. She hurried to him. Mr. Tock, how tiresome of someone to splash red and blue paint over your newly painted house. I was so sorry you had to paint it all over again. Mr. Tock stared at Mrs. Jiffy as if she had gone mad. Madam, he said, no one has splashed red and blue paint over my house as far as I know, and as for painting it all over again, I shouldn't dream of it. What are you talking about? But Mr. Tock, don't you remember you used your long ladder to paint your house outside this very morning? Cried Mrs. Jiffy. Jiffy went to borrow it, and you said you couldn't because you were using it. Mr. Tock pricked up his ears. So did Mr. and Mrs. Gobbo and Mr. Tinky. Oh, it was Jiffy who told you that, was it? Said Mr. Tock. Well, we know Jiffy and his great big stories. He's just been telling you fibs as usual, Mrs. Jiffy. Didn't want to do something, I suppose, so he made up all kinds of fairy tales. He didn't come to borrow our stepladder, said Mrs. Gobbo. And he didn't come to borrow my stick, said Mr. Tinky, but I'll lend it to him, Mrs. Jiffy. I'll certainly lend it to him. You send him along to me this evening, and I'll lend it to him, all right. Oh, yes, you do that, said Mrs. Gobbo. I think I will send him, said poor Mrs. Jiffy, looking very sad. He's a naughty boy. He'll have to be stopped, or goodness knows what will happen to him. I'll send him along this evening, Mr. Tinky, and you can lend him your stick. Lend it to him hard, won't you? And to Jiffy's great astonishment, when his mother got home after tea, she told him he was to go straight off to Mr. Tinky's and borrow his stick. It's mended now, said his mother, looking straight at him. Quite mended. The burglars have all gone. He can use his stick for other bad people again. You go along and ask him to lend it you. Oh, Ma, don't make me, cried Jiffy in a fright. He didn't like the look on his mother's face at all. I'll get you the ball. I hid it under the bush. It didn't go into the gutter, and that's why I didn't go and borrow sticks and ladders to get it down. That would have been silly. It would, said his mother. Very silly. I felt very silly this afternoon too, saying I was sorry about burglars and bad backs and repainted houses, but now Mr. Tinky wants to lend you his stick, so you must go. I'll get the ball, and when you get back you can take it to Sing Song and say you're sorry. Go along. Well, there was nothing for it but to go. Jiffy doesn't want to. He doesn't like Mr. Tinky's stick, and he's going to like it even less now. Hurry up, Jiffy, and go. It's your own fault, you know, and I don't feel sorry for you one little bit. So that's the end of that one. I shall read another story from Christina's Kite very soon. But for now, please don't forget to like, comment and share my video and subscribe to my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.